Welcome back to Let's Read Darksiders, the Abomination Vault, by R.A. Marmel. I'm BurningDogFace, and today we're going to be taking a look at Chapter 17. Last time, War and Death came face to face with Hadrimon and Belisatra, and the stage seemed to be set for a tag team boss fight. And then someone went and threw a wrench in the works. Let's continue. They all felt it. To Death, at least, it began as a peculiar prickling on the skin, almost like immersion in a fluid just slightly caustic. Frost formed in the surrounding corridors, only a few feet from the main chamber. Yet the temperature in that chamber spiked, rising until shimmers of heat visibly rose from the stone slab on which Death stood. The air grew thick, heavy, not as though it were choked with some sort of fume, but rather with a growing pressure. Something loomed from a direction that had nothing at all to do with north or south, east or west, depth or breadth or height. Something pressed against the walls through which the horsemen so easily stepped, and it too wanted in. Something ripped in the air above them. No, it was the air itself that tore, revealing a ragged hole, black as matricide, reeking of brimstone. It fell away, a tunnel of nothing that led to a pit of liquid fire. Hell, it seemed, had followed the Council's riders, and now it disgorged a fine selection of the horrors it had to offer. Squawking, shrieking, shouting, gibbering, running, flying, slithering, flopping, they tumbled into the laboratory. On and on, until it seemed even the huge chamber could not contain them all. Those that could clung to the walls, skulking overhead, while others mounted the balconies and gantries. Blades and guns of a blackened, twisted nature, formed from the desiccated secretions that were the heart of demonic craftsmanship, protruded from the occasional fist or tendril. Most of the hellish beasts seemed more than content, however, with tooth and talon. For the length of several breaths they held, pausing in their cries and howls. The tableau grew silent, save for the skittering of limbs, the occasional splatter of dangling drool. And Death's muttered, "Well, that was unexpected." A single demon roared a command. Death could not, in the crowd, tell which it had been, but the voice was wet, burbling, like someone speaking through the scum congealed atop an old stew. And the horde fell upon them. Hadrimon's sword twisting between flying horrors, affliction licked out at any who dared come too near, and Black Mercy spoke in rapid bursts. Demons howled in pain as the teeth launched by the ancient weapon ripped through flesh and spirit alike. The jagged chain stretched even further from Belisatra's wrists, then shot up and around, shredding flesh from every demon they passed. They wrapped around some targets, a limb if it was all they could catch, a torso or head when possible, and either crushed the creature within to pulp, or unwound so fast they sawed the thing in half. War stamped and thrust, spitting demon after demon on Chaos Eater's black edge. He had little room to maneuver, trapped in the center of the workshop, surrounded by more foes than any of the others, and that was fine by him. Claws and blades screeched harmlessly off his armor. His blade fed on the chaos and carnage, and the grin on his face was almost itself demonic. Behind his mask, Death smiled and leapt. He could have reached any of the lower bridges or balconies of that leap, so high did it carry him, but that would have meant coming up in the midst of a demon cluster. He'd be delivering himself into their hands before he could bring his own weapon to bear. So instead he leaped towards the wall opposite his goal. The horseman swung his legs forward so that they struck the stone first. His knees folded, absorbing the impact, and thrust out again in a second jump straight from the wall itself. Once more across the chamber, and he plummeted down onto his target from above. The startled demons thrashed about in the balcony, moving to reorient themselves to face the unexpected attack, and succeeded mostly in getting in one another's way. "Stupid move. You thought to intimidate us, and all you did was crowd yourselves so badly your numbers scarcely matter." Death tucked his legs tightly under him as he fell, so that they would not present the demons with potential targets before he could strike back with Harvester. The weapon now boasted 2 blades, one on each end of the haft. It was already whirling with impossible speed, nothing but a razored blur. Death's wrists passed over and around each other, and he himself was spinning when his feet finally struck stone. Blood and various ichors spattered in a series of short, swift geysers, followed by limbs and larger gobbets. And just that swiftly, the small balcony was empty of any living being but Death himself. Harvester's twin blades had proved long enough to reach all edges of the platform, and the tightly packed demons had left themselves no room to run. A trio of Duskwings, bat-like, venomous horrors of frightening speed, swooped down on the blood-slick balcony from above, their high voices screeching in fury. Leather wings batted the air, casting the stench of clinging, caustic guano before them. They descended in a simple but effective formation, the 2 on each side a bit lower and further back, to ensure their target couldn't dive aside from the central Duskwing's strike. Death let them come, and then dived forward into a tight roll. Harvester split before he was back on his feet, becoming a pair of long, narrow javelins. The horseman rose and stabbed. The lead bat demon was behind him now, still trying to recover from the dive he'd avoided. The other 2 flopped, screaming on Harvester's twin points. But not for long. The surviving member of the trio swung back around, but Death was already in the air. Harvester, again a single scythe, he held in one hand. The other snagged the creature by the throat, leaving them both dangling high above the floor. The Duskwing, not strong enough to maintain flight for long with the passenger, began to descend in a broad spiral. It lashed its barbed tail at Death, hellish poisons glistening in the light. It was the obvious move, however, and a simple flick of Harvester removed the threat. The demon shrieked once more as its severed tail tumbled into the massed demons below. "War! Clear me some room to work!" Below, Death's younger brother was almost laughing, his entire body quivering with the energies Chaos Eater absorbed from the battle. The creatures around him were humanoid, bursting with obscenely oversized muscles. Stunted wings, vestigial and useless, dangled morosely from their back. Their heads were horned, their mouths fanged. They were in purpose and nature not even individuals, but weapons, no less so than the axes they carried. These were the Phantom Guard, the core of almost every hellish army, feared throughout creation. But not by war. The first sweep of Chaos Eater shattered one axe and knocked 3 others aside. The second gutted all 4 of the Phantom Guard demons who had held them. Then his blade and his soul equally empowered, War knelt and drove Chaos Eater into the stone. As in the White City, blades similar to Chaos Eater itself burst upward in a thicket of deadly steel. Demons fell or retreated, screaming obscenities. The blades vanished as swiftly as they'd appeared, and Death had the space he'd requested. Death snapped the Duskwing's neck and dropped down beside his brother, and he too began to draw on the power he'd drawn from the defeated foe. Unlike war, the Elder Horseman did not require any specific weapon to feed on the strength of the fallen. It came to him naturally, bits of energy sloughing from the departing souls and dispersing essence. But that meant that, for him, the chaos that fed war was insufficient. It was the deaths themselves that mattered. Against the automatons on the fields of Kothysos or in the Crowfather's domain he hadn't bothered, though technically living, such lesser constructs being soulless, granted him only a fraction of the power he could gain from other creatures. Demons, though. Demons were vile engines of destruction, utterly irredeemable. But they were alive, and death grew strong as they fell. He raised his arms, and a cloud of bone fragments sprang from the floor, precisely as they'd done outside. Again they whirled, a semi-solid cyclone with death and war at the center. This time, however, it was not several feet of solid stone at which the horsemen threw them. Demons disintegrated into flapping fronds of shredded meat. So loud was the whirlwind, the horsemen couldn't even hear the enemy's screams. When death allowed the bone storm to disperse, more than 2/3 of the demons in the chamber were dead or dying. Of course, the downside to this was that the survivors consisted almost entirely of those demons tough enough to withstand such an assault. Again, the horde's leader barked his orders, and this time Death could see who, or rather what, that leader might be. After a good long look, he still wasn't sure. The creature was enormous, not the largest demon Death had ever seen by any means, but certainly one of the largest humanoids he'd encountered. Better than twice War's height, it was fat. Not as a descriptor. This was no humanoid creature that happened to be obese. It literally was fat. Ripples, rolls, bulges, and slabs of fat formed something vaguely the shape of a torso, with smaller columns or protrusions that might be arms and legs. It seemed to have no structure, no bones. It bent where it needed to bend, compressed where it needed to compress. The demon walked with a horrid, lurching gait, pointed with thick, gummy fingers. And the head, nearly as broad as the creature's shoulders, it sat on a short stump of a neck, and it too was fat. No hair, no features, just more folds, stacked and rumpling where the face should have been. Only when the thing screamed its orders could Death see that one of those folds concealed a mouth. Ringed with jagged teeth, the only visible part of the demon with any rigidity, it proved nearly as wide as the head itself. Death knew a great deal about demon taxonomy, but this monstrosity was new to him. He was about to ask his brother if he'd seen such a creature before, when War asked, "Do you suppose that thing has internal organs?" "I'd guess that means he doesn't know any more about it than I. Let's find out, shall we?" The horsemen moved, and the remaining demons, as well as fresh reinforcements dashing through the hanging portal and flinging themselves to the walls and balconies, roared as one. "You go high this time." Death's burning eyes flickered meaningfully across the demons massing on the floor, then upwards. War followed that gaze, nodded, and jumped for the nearest balcony. Death waded into the horde, harvester split, one scythe in each hand. Primarily more phantom guards, these, but accompanied by squat, powerful beasts whose stone claws crackled and smoked with undying flame. Even from halfway across the room, he could feel the heat on his skin. "Those," the horseman decided, "I think I'll handle at a distance." A wise tactic, perhaps, but insufficient. Death was in the midst of a veritable ring of phantom guards when one of the flame-clawed demons dug its talons into the wall, ripped loose a chunk of stone twice its own size, and hurled it. It was an attack he'd never anticipated, and for all his agility, the press of phantom guards meant that the horseman couldn't evade its flight. Neither could at least 3 of the demons surrounding him, but that would prove little consolation in the moments to come. The slab of rock, which seemed, impossibly, to have ignited beneath the demon's flaming claws, slammed Death to the unyielding floor. Several of his attackers were pulped or incinerated, and it was only the horseman's greater resilience and swift reflexes that partially saved him. He lay pinned, his left side in flaring agony, fire licking at his arm, his shoulder, his neck. He could actually hear the sizzling as some of his hair and bits of his skin boiled away. He did not scream. That would be a satisfaction death would never offer any foe, but it was a near thing. The remaining phantom guards clustered around him, striking with their brutal axes, and though the stone itself limited their angle of attack, it also prevented Death from dodging or rolling aside. Steel cut through flesh, severed muscles, cracked bones. Nothing he couldn't recover from, and swiftly, but only if he had the time. Death lashed out once with the scythe in his free hand, just enough to make the demons jump back, and then threw all his focus into a single instant's concentration. Harvester flowed, becoming a single weapon once more. The scythe in Death's free hand disappeared. The weapon in his left, pinned beneath the rock, became an ugly, thick-bladed knife. The demons closed in once more, axes raised high, straining every muscle, ignoring the searing pain shooting through those already torn and bleeding. The horseman turned his wrist so that the blade pointed more or less upright, taking a small fraction of the stone's weight. Then, at Death's silent command, Harvester again resumed its natural shape. The scythe expanded instantly upward and outward, flinging the flaming rock aside. Death rolled, smothering the worst of the flames that had caught across his body, and then he too was upright once more. The phantom guards howling on his heels, he bounded forward, limping but still swift. Above, his brother seemed to be faring somewhat better. Death caught War's eye, tilted his head, and then dashed in the direction he'd just indicated. He ran until he stood in the shadow of one of the lower balconies, his back to a wall of stone. They could not come at him from behind, and the overhang prevented the squat beast with the flaming claws from chucking more rocks his way. Tactically sound, but it also meant he was backed into a corner. Once the demons had surrounded him on all three open sides, which indeed they did almost instantly, Death had no room to maneuver. The phantom guard and their clawed leader advanced, grinning and growling until their lips and teeth glistened with unshed drool. Death retreated a step further, his back now pressed tight against the wall, and shouted, "Now!" Above, War broke away from his own foes and leapt off the side of the gantry on which he'd been fighting. He plummeted, swiftly but surely, to land on the balcony directly above his brother. He spun, putting his own back to the wall, bellowed a fearsome cry, and slammed Chaos Eater point first into the stone by his feet. Again and again. Stones splintered, cracks shooting swiftly across the balcony as though literally fleeing the black blade. Dust flew, and gravity reached greedily for a prize long denied. The entire balcony, save for a nub about a pace across, on which War stood, collapsed. It passed only an arm's length before Death's face, a blinding cloud and deafening clamor. But the horseman didn't flinch. He might not always trust his brother's judgment, but of War's accuracy he harbored no doubt at all. His wounds already beginning to close, Death broke into a run before the dust had settled. Most of the demons he'd lured beneath the balcony had been well and truly macerated, or at least pinned, but those at the very edges might yet have strength to haul themselves free. Harvester flying, Death raced around all four sides of the fallen slab, trimming whatever demonic parts and limbs still jutted from beneath, as though removing the crust from a trencher of bread. Blood and oozes spurted, screams rose and fell, and the balcony settled more firmly into place as those who had still struggled beneath it ceased their efforts. Only a few phantom guards remained on the ground. A smattering of bat-like dusk wings hovered uneasily in the air. It shouldn't prove difficult to... A low shout echoed from above. Death beheld the demon's leader, that creature of fat and fang dangling from a gantry. Its mouth had stretched open, unhinging wider than its own body to clamp down on War from above. The younger horseman now hung from that loathsome maw, his entire left arm and shoulder having disappeared into the demon's gullet. The high squeal of rending metal suggested that those teeth hadn't yet punctured War's armor, but it was only a matter of seconds. Death slapped a bare hand against the stone wall and whispered his necromantic rites. Skeletal hands erupted, not from the floor around him, but the gantry above. The horseman had no doubt that they could do little to the flabby demon, but then he wasn't trying to hold or injure the thing. Instead, at Death's orchestration, the entire swarm of bony digits shoved. Demon and rider toppled from the gantry and struck the floor with a loud clang and a sodden splat. The impact threw War free, and he scrambled upright, Chaos Eater raised, jaw trembling in anger. The demon, too, seemed no worse for wear as it rolled and bubbled and flopped to its feet. This close, the creature reeked of sweat and mildew and gangrenous sores. Ebony sword and jagged scythe swept in and out. Flesh and fat split, spilling gouts of blubbery, mustard-hued tallow. But no matter how broad or how deep, the wounds seemed to cause the demon no great inconvenience. It never slowed, never staggered. If it did indeed have organs, as War had wondered, they were buried too deep for even the horsemen's potent weapons to easily reach. And each time they tried, they brought themselves uncomfortably near that impossibly wide, impossibly flexible jaw. Until finally, War and Death had both grown heartily sick of the whole thing. A quick whispered exchange, and they darted forward, approaching the demon from either side. The maw stretched wide once more, the entire head flopping to and fro as the beast decided which of them to bite. Death lashed out with an empty hand and grabbed the thing's upper jaw, his fingers slotted in between the razor-edged teeth. War did the same, snagging the lower. And then both, with a strenuous heave, yanked the gaping, unhinged mouth down past the demon's shoulders, literally turning it partway inside out. Blubber folded, viscous fat fountained up in an oily geyser, and a sound that might or might not have been something akin to a scream burst from the newly exposed and glistening mass. The demon spasmed once, twice, and collapsed to leak slowly away across the floor. And that'll do it for Chapter 17. That was quite the battle, though I'll note they lost track of their enemies very, very quickly. I kind of thought there was going to be a nod in there to the fact that it was War's left arm that ended up in the thing's mouth, given that I'm pretty sure that arm is artificial. At the very least, the hand is like 3 times bigger than the other one, so it certainly suggests it's not natural. I believe the original explanation was that War tried to stop being a horseman, and Death removed his left forearm to dissuade him. But, yes. I shall see you next time when the horsemen pick up the pieces and see what the state of affairs is after the fight. And I'm looking forward to that on the next episode of Let's Read Darksiders, the Abomination Vault, by Ari Marmel. I'm BurningDogFace, and I'll see you then. Later!